Welcome to the review of The War of the Dwarves, which is the second book in the Dwarves series by Marcus Height. We already reviewed the first one quite a while ago, and I liked it a lot, and I have the entire series, so might as well, move on. Yep. So let's start off by introducing a little. So this book was written in 2004, so it's 21 years old. It's old. And it's a beast, just like the first book. This one's well loved. It's been read a couple of times by me and my dad, who also enjoyed it quite a bit. Now, on the story graph, which is what I started to use instead of Goodreads, it stands at a respectable 3.9 out of 5, or based on 480 reviews. So the story graph doesn't separate between reviewing and rating like Goodreads does. Of course, the community is much smaller, but I still think 4 out of 5 is pretty darn good. People have said with 65%, so a very much almost a super majority, that we are looking at a medium paced book. I think it is slow to medium paced, so that's pretty good. I agree. Is it plot or character driven? And here we are nearly with a 37-48% split on plot and the mix, and only 11% character, and then the remaining 3 is non-applicable. Which is weird, because I cannot think of a story that isn't either, but okay. Is there strong character development? 69% nice says yes, and 20% says complicated, and the rest says no. So, okay. We will see some character development. Are the character lovables? A clear majority of 88% says yes, which is awesome. Are they diverse? I mean, what I'm reading up here is like the basics that the story graph asks to kind of gauge the book, and I kind of enjoy them as introducing because it can give us an idea of what people think. Are the characters diverse? And just over 50% says yes. And are the flaws of the characters a main focus? And 60% says yes. So it tells us a little bit about the book. Now, I bought this book, back in 2000 and I wanna say 13, somewhere around there at least, along with the first one and and the next two ones might even be older actually. And I love these books. They are absolutely amazing, but I hate the covers. Just like the first one, I am not a fan of this early 2000 CGI dwarves. Right. We are sticking to a design though, which is a dwarf doing something related, to the book. In this case, it's a war. We're screaming, we're ready for battle, we're going into battle, we are very injured. So, I will give them credit for that. But I don't think this early 2000s CGI is a nice cover design. It's not even a cover, it's actually an illustration done by Bob Lear. And the design is done by Peter Cotton. And I don't think they did a very good job. They're probably amazing people, probably very skilled in their job. I just don't think they hit it with the dwarves. So, with that out of the way, let's enter the book again a little. And let's get to part 1. And actually, when I say part 1, I literally mean part 1. There are 2 parts in this book, so that's how we're gonna separate this book. And part 1 lasts, let's just figure it out quickly, the first 360 pages. So it's like what, half the book? Half the book. The prologue takes place right where the first book ends. They have a little overlap, but here we see it from Burndale's POV. As you might recall, Burndale was left behind as he was stuck he was struck in the back by 2 elf arrows. And the prologue describes what happens when the falling star that we saw at the end of the first book hits the ground. And the chaos and destruction is actually an amazing way to quickly create tension and force the problem of the book onto us. How are the dwarves gonna defend with their castle broken? Where did the star land? What's gonna happen now? I absolutely love it because the prologue adds a lot where I feel like they often don't add anything or not enough. Either way, they are usually too vague or not vague enough. And I think Heights hit the head on the nail here with his prologue, because it is perfectly clear what happened without telling us what actually happened. And moving on to talking about a lot of stuff happening. Chapter 1, a lot happens, holy shit. But a lot of works like around the same thing. Like a lot of things are just around the same central point. And we get to see some more setup for the story, basically. In this case, the orcs are getting access to dark water that prevents them from dying. Most of the chapters then dedicated to the battle between the dwarves and humans and orcs. So dwarves, humans versus orcs. And we do get a lot of stuff. It seems the thirdlings are not giving up, and apparently the king's daughter is on a secret mission. But who is she? And what is she doing, and how is it all of this related to the falling star, and how are the undying orcs related? Like, so much setup already, so many questions. It is a thick book, so it does make a lot of sense. So to recap everything, what happened where the asteroid landed? What happened to Burndale? What about the dark patches? What are the southern orcs up to? What is the plan of the thirdlings? And who is the king's daughter? And how does everything match together? We get this from the prologue and chapter 1. All of these questions, it's so good. I love it. Compared to the previous book, I feel like we have many more subplots in this one. And the main plot isn't as straightforward as the previous, because we just mentioned a lot of questions, but which one is the main plot? Or all of them the main plot? And, it's probably gonna, it's gonna be clear as we get through the book. But already from the beginning, we know we're dealing with a lot of heavy and big subplots. And the book is even slower than the first one, and that is saying something, because I feel like the first one was slow. And we get so much world building and plot threads, you would think Heights is setting up for a pentology or something. Insert "this is foreshadowing me" joke right here. And we get more of the human kings dealing with the thirdlings, and in this case both real and fabricated. Or maybe not, we don't actually know. Claims that the thirdlings have on the human kings. And it gives us such an interesting look into how the humans see the dwarves. It also adds so much to what happened in the first book. Idol's Lane is relatively fine, and so they have the money, food and power to reject the thirdlings. But Godagur can't afford not to due to a food shortage. And it's interesting to see how the thirdlings are only getting some of what they want, but at the same time they're also sowing discontent between the humans. So they might not get from Idol's Lane exactly what they want, but they are managing to make sure that the kingdom of Gorogiles no longer seem favorable by them, and therefore still getting a little of what they need, and it's great scheming. We then also get the Alpha scheming against the humans and dwarves, trying to fight back and eradicate them. And what's interesting is we don't know what the goal of the Alpha is. We only know they wanted information and to be annoying. And in scene I am particularly thinking of when we get the mythical origin story of the Alpha, seen from Elf's POV, but told by an elf. It's super interesting to me, and it adds a lot of depth when the dwarves comment that the Alpha probably have a different story than the elves. Because they probably do, but we don't hear that. We hear the elven story, so maybe this was the elf story. So maybe they don't have a different story. And I don't know, I think it's funny that Heights do this, because it's an incredible amount of world building he's going through just for this. But it's also, like, how important is it to know the origin story of your elf? For the grand scheme of things, not really that important, but it still sets the world apart. It makes it feel more living. So yeah. And we also get Tundil at the meeting of the High Kings, where he is crowned the Fifthling King, and the new High King is also crowned. And it's great, and there's a lot of fun seeing the final threads from Book 1 get completed. Now remember, Book 1 was only half about studying Nordon, the other half was finding the next High King. And we also get the blossoming love life get a new step. Like Tungdil's love life gets a new step. And it's great, and it's cute. We also learned that dwarves don't really do PDA when unmarried, whereas humans, they don't care. And we see him be happy and in love, and show PDA, which a lot of dwarves are confused about. Only for Belandis's parents to reveal that they found someone for her to marry. But also that the prejudice against Tungdil as a thirdling is still a thing. The dwarves are notoriously stubborn, and that is also when it comes to hating thirdlings. And I'm not really a fan of the parents just acting like saving Girdlegard was nothing. It would have been better if it was decided before Tungdil saved the world, and he just hadn't been able to tell Belandis yet because of the book. And now that the wedding is decided for someone else, the law is binding. We didn't still get all the same things, but we get a better recognition of Tungdil being a good person. And it still serves the purpose. It still shows that they hate on the thirdlings, and they still can show, maybe they can show their dad being a little stubborn and be like, I never would have liked it anyways, like trying to justify it for himself. Or maybe he is a little prejudiced, but he acknowledges that Tungdil is a bit of a different thirdling. You know, I don't know, something like that. And then Tungdil and Boindil and some of the other dwarves sets out to find their freelings. And there's multiple reasons for that. And by multiple, I mean 2. They hope they have a medic who can save Boindil, and warriors to help defend the Fifthling Kingdom. All the while, we get the B story of Andokai teaching Namora to use magic, so there would be more mages to help defend Girdlegard. This B plot also involves Rodario figuring out what Fergus was harmed by, and that Fergus was harmed by crooks hired by Andokai, and now Namora wants revenge. And it's actually a really good B plot story, since it helps Heights to build out the world and show us what's going on, but also to make sure it doesn't feel like it's just the dwarves who are trying to save the world. And we get it in a completely different way than what the dwarves are doing. Like Andokai and Namora's way of doing it is way different from how Tungdil and the twins would do it. And typically, especially in the first book, what we saw a lot of the time was just like the dwarves were trying to save the world, and the humans almost felt like they were just tagging along for the giggles, shits and giggles. So it's really awesome we get a little more life out of the world. Now, back to the A plot. We get Tungdil and the team reaching a small village they think might help them find the Freelings. And they find a thirdling who explains how to get to the Freelings. Suspiciously, they have to dive underwater, which dwarves hate, and while at the lake, they get attacked by Alpha from earlier in the story. Only Tungdil and Boindil makes it out alive, but without the axe Keenfire from the first book. Isn't it weird that a thirdling is telling them, and then they get ambushed? Also, I don't think that thirdling is seen again, so I don't know if it's were a story plot that Heights dropped, or if it was more just to create an action scene. It would have been an interesting story plot to see it, but I didn't really feel like it. Like that was what happened. And here in the Freeling city, Tungdil gets instantly smitten with another dwarf, the medic Myr. And she has a longer name, but Myr. That's what she's called. It's a little clunkily written because Heights tries to pass it off as being mainly her mind that get Tungdil in love and then her body afterwards. But it's really when you like what happens, he sees her, falls in love, learns that she's smart, falls more in love. So it's kind of the opposite of what happened. So it just reads awkwardly. And also it's like you already talked about giving your heart to Belandis. Like it's fair, you can fall in love with other people, but it just it felt a little odd. And we then get a chapter following the Alpha in their kingdom. And I love Heights is doing this because it's great to get a more expanded view of the world and how it works. We learn of their mission and we now get a proper recurring antagonist for this story. And you could say it's a bit late in the book because we are pretty far, but I think it makes sense because the book is a lot of setting up. Now, talking about being late, let's skip ahead a little. The dwarves have traveled back to the Fifthling Kingdom just in time to help slay some orcs and hopefully save their kingdom. Because these aren't ordinary orcs, these are the immortal ones. And the fight is fine. We get that the dwarves are pressed and losing, trying to pull back, and then we get the cavalry of more dwarves coming to help. But the best part is when Tungdal gets Keenfire back and fights the Alpha. The fight was really awesome, and it really showed the desperation of the dwarves, but also of the Alpha to revenge her parents, which shows the enemy aren't just some mindless evil, but a thinking being with feelings. And of course, Tungdal wins the battle, but loses the war because he loses Keenfire again. And all throughout the story, Tungdal has had this voice telling him evil things to do, like letting the Fifthling King, so I did say Tungdal would crown the king. He was nominated, that's a mistake by me. And then the man Belandis got engaged to ended up becoming king. And back to the thing, Tungdal has had this voice in his head telling him to do evil things, like letting the Fifthling King die and battling the orcs. And I got a feeling it's a thirdling thing, but it's really, really weird since it was never a thing in the first book. He does briefly talk with Berndil about it, who explains he hears it too due to his past, but it doesn't feel like it's the same thing. It feels like Berndil has some PTSD of a kind, whereas Tungdal has some sort of genetic magic telling him to be evil. It's really weird, it's really clunky in a way, but it's also, I guess, fine. Now, the B-plot has traveled to another great library to see, like, instead of Pretoria, is that what it's called? Where they normally are? We should be able to find it here. Porista. So instead of Porista, they travel to another great library thingy that has historical accounts of immigrants from the Outer Lands. And of course, they find some people from the Outer Lands. And when they visit them, we get an exposition and lore. And I love that exposition and lore, because the guards are the same in Girdlegard and the Outer Lands, but goes by different names. And also, the story itself was great. It lines up with what we know, and it explains it as a prophecy, although a very direct one, and not a metaphorical one, like you would find in our mythologies. I think that's fine. We get what we need from it, but god damn it, I hate Endokai, and I can't wait for Namora to get her revenge. But yeah, like having the same gods with different names kind of reminds me of how the ancient Greeks and the Romans, especially how the Romans did it with just, oh, you're the god of this, that's our god, so, you know, your god is this god. End of discussion. We just add an epithet or whatever, and then you're happy. And it's kind of the same here, where like it's clear the Outer Lands and Girdlegard gods are the same. We even told that. Just like in our world, the Roman and Greek gods are basically the same. Not even basic, they are the same. Now, ending part 1. Tungdal gets a light kiss from Mira after a shadow watches them from the door. I don't think Mira is good, and Heights doesn't seem to want to be too subtle about it. But also the shadow could be the king or Belandis coming to see them. It could technically be Belandis wanting to talk to Tungdal, and then Mira kisses him to make her jealous. But it could also be an infiltrator from the Thirdling and Mira's distracting Tungdal. And the reason why I think that is more likely when I read it, now I of course know the reason, but when I read it I thought that was more likely is because Heights is not very subtle whenever it comes to love. So I could imagine he would probably have highlighted it was Belandis in the door to create more attention. So far, I think the sequel is on par with the first book. There are a lot of things I really like, and there are a lot of things I think where Heights could have used another edit pass. But all in all, I am enjoying this and I can't wait to get to part 2. So without further ado, now this entire section I read without writing any notes, and that means there are things I normally would comment on that I now would be skipping, and so I will focus on the overarching story beats and only pick out really highlight worthy moments, and not necessarily if I find a small detail I like. I love the first time we see the Freelings and how the twins Christian everything, like when they are there. Naked chins, no weapons, perfume. Like, it's technically not the first time we see it. I know that. But it's the first time we get to spend proper time there. And I think it was Burndale who compared them to the elves. It's great to see some contrast, and some contrast definitely makes sense. But I feel like the difference is still way too big. We're told the dwarves are very stubborn and their ways are set in stone. But the Freelings are very different. How long does it take for an exiled dwarf to get used to the Freelings? Why aren't there more similarities? It's a bit extreme with the differences. It makes for funny moments, but it doesn't quite add up to scrutiny. And the idea of a communal prayer to Ragas makes sense. This is a people who got exiled, banished from their homes, in order to quickly become part of something new. An easier start is through shared religion, and doing it communal allows for new citizens to meet people and gain a network faster. It's kind of like when we move to another city, like far away from where we lived before, we try to find some way of establishing a network, either through religion, a hobby, a sport, or anything communal basically. But that's how you meet people. And we also get some more backstory to Tungdil. We learn who his parents were and how they died. And for Tungdil, it's great to learn more. Just having names and a killer is fine for him. But for us, it feels like the mystique of who his parents were lets Tungdil mark his own path. And I'm glad, and this has to be understood in a way that if we knew who his parents were and they were very important, Tungdil would not be that special. So, well, he would be special born, but it wouldn't feel as great that him becoming special, becoming the hero. It would just be like, oh yeah, of course, he's like the son of a king or whatever. Now, talking of kings, I am glad he isn't royalty, but just from an ordinary dwarf family. Exactly for that. I also appreciate Heights for not dwelling on this for too long, but just here's the story, here's how he reacts, now it's a character motivation for him to gain revenge, but that's it. We're not gonna go into more detail. Now, at the B plot, I didn't like Endokai, but her being dead and Namora taking on the cruel personality in her stead is really just annoying. You could have kept them short-tempered, but well, you kept Namora short-tempered, but well-meaning. Now, both Namora and Endokai are just cruel, and also instead of keeping Fergus in a coma, just revive him and tell Namora she could learn magic so she can protect her family. Same argument, but we would have Fergus and Rodario doing goofy stuff in the city. I just feel like it wasn't quite thought through with the plot. You could chalk it up to Endokai being desperate, but then I would just have loved if Namora would have turned back to being more of a good side. Now, the Thirdlings have of course called for a meeting to save Girdlegard, but they refuse any dwarves except for a Thirdling, so Tungdil will be there. And what I like is the Thirdlings are trying to be sneaky, but everybody sees through it and gets a good idea right away. And he even, based on the words by Romo? Yeah, Romo, the Thirdling, deducts what is actually going on and explains it to the other kings. Like, Tungdil predicts precisely what the plan of the Thirdlings are. And infuriatingly, the High King Gandora decides to just blindly trust the words of the Thirdling versus Tungdil. And it really makes no sense to me. Why would you trust them with no proof when did they earn this level of trust? It was also in the section that I got my first suspicion on who Mira actually is. She really questioned Tungdil's logic, so much so he had to ask if she was on his side. Like, when did the Thirdlings earn so much trust that we do not require proof that they can save the world? Like, the fuck, man. Now, skipping ahead, we get to see what the Thirdling's specialty really is, and it's war. Like, remember, every dwarf, like the Secondling is gem cutting, the Firstlings are masonry and so on, and the Thirdlings is war. And they're efficient at war machine making, their strategy and fighting, way better than the other kingdoms. and the siege for the first in castle showed that greatly. They have to join together. And that makes it so much more fun. They all want Girdlegard, so it turns out the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The Furlings don't want the outside forces to come and disturb their plans, and the other kingdoms don't want them to come and ruin the place. It's a great setup, and Heights uses every moment he can to show the lack of trust between them by having them throw dicks at each other or insult each other. We even in this book get explained who Geron is, and learning that added nothing. It really was great when he was a mystery, at least what he looked like. Heights had built up Geron as this great and terrifying beast, but when we see his face, it doesn't come off that way. The mystique would have been better. You can have people see him without the helmet, just don't show it to us. Show us their reaction. Sadly he dies, and I think this was when Namora as a character for me just broke. She had no reason to hate Geron. He did what he was ordered, and it has been established he doesn't question or shy away from them. He doesn't do that towards her, he didn't do it towards Lendokai. So her letting him die was just such a waste, and it felt so odd from the collected Namora we know from the first book. And you could argue it's the alpha in her or the crystal, but we aren't really showing the crystal controlling her like he did to Nordun. Speaking of alpha, they now need to help the other races to survive. So we get Ondori, the minor villain in this story, to join the team instead of fighting them. And it's done so much better than the Thirdlings. And I said I enjoyed the Thirdlings, but they are mostly mute and are only receiving the dicks. But Ondori is savagely giving back. It's exciting, it's funny to see how much this little group can accomplish when working together. It's a bit of a rehash of the first book where elves, dwarves and humans had to work together, but they were all more or less forces of good. Now it's evil and good working to stop another evil. And it adds some new flair and tension we don't really get with the other good races. Now, the siege on Porista and the fight against their leader was fine. I didn't think much of it. My main complaint is Burndale dying. It really sucked. But not in a good way, not in the way where it's like, oh, he died as a hero, whatever. It just sucked. And it just made the book a lot worse. And the reason is that we spent a lot of time in the first book with him injured. Like I think it's about halfway through the book or something like that, he get injured. And a great deal of this book, he's also injured. So killing him off adds nothing. It would have been so much better to keep him until the next book, for instance. It's not like his death changes anything for the story. It just felt like spectacle. Now, after the fight, we learn there are no more magic, since it's trapped in this little diamond. And Tungdil gets multiple of them made, one for each ruler, and then the Dwarven Kings decide to make an extra for Tungdil. And I'm not sure if Heights was going for a Lord of the Rings reference, with the amount of rings forged for each race, 7 for the dwarves, 9 for the human kings, blah blah and so on. But that was kind of what I was like, I know it doesn't the numbers doesn't quite match, but that was kind of what I was thinking. That was like the way, like how I ended up thinking of it. It's a smart strategy what they're going for. With no one knows which is the actual diamond, so gotta protect them all with their life. And then, given we know how important these diamonds are, it's really weird that they just would accept one of them being stolen, and that they don't instantly raise the alarm, because what if it's the important one? Now, finally I want to comment on the lack of elves in this book. And we get an explanation from the ruler of the elves, and it's a decent explanation. Not only was there sworn enemies on the good side, they also had to fight what is essentially a minor deity for them. I don't mind that explanation at all. I would have liked to see a little more from the elves in the form of maybe deserters joining the minor deity. Maybe just seeing rumblings from the elves, like throwing warnings at the other kings or whatever. like something, so they don't just feel gone. But you know, it was fine. But let's wrap up this review. It's quite long. Should you read this book? If you like the first one, I think you should. It's a good book. It has a lot of flaws. It also has a lot of good things going for it. It is a chunky book. It takes a while to read. It is a slow-paced book in my opinion. But yeah, I really enjoy it. I think it's a fun book. I had a lot of fun reading it. I am going to go through the rest of it, but just like between the first and second, I have a long list of books I want to read first before picking up the third one. But we are reaching into a series where I haven't read them yet, so maybe I'll pick up, faster. But yeah, I like this one. Next time we're gonna be looking at Grey Bastards, so look out for that. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more.